When a devastated mother lost her newborn during childbirth, the immense sorrow compelled her to seek one last encounter with her infant at the hospital morgue. There, she stumbled upon her supposedly deceased baby, alive beside another healthy infant, and witnessed a doctor's dubious actions. This accidental discovery unraveled a dark conspiracy far beyond a mere medical mishap, challenging a mother's resilience and will to unearth the truth. Before we proceed, let us know your location, and if you enjoy our stories, don't forget to subscribe. The night was frantic as 28-year-old Eloise Carter was hurried through the hospital's sterile halls. Her labor screams echoed, drawing the attention of patients and visitors. The stark hospital lights cast sharp shadows over the paramedics as they navigated her to the delivery ward. Clutching the stretcher's rails, Eloise's face was etched with agony, each contraction a brutal wave of torment. She had envisioned a calm, prepared birth with her boyfriend Corey at her side. Instead, she found herself alone, frightened, and utterly overwhelmed. As they entered the delivery area, Dr. Alan Greaves awaited, his demeanor grave yet professional. He quickly took charge, directing the nurses. "Room 3, quickly. Set up the fetal monitors and hand me her chart," he demanded. A nurse rushed the clipboard to him, which he reviewed intently. Eloise sought his gaze for comfort, but was gripped by another wrenching contraction. "Miss Carter," Dr. Greaves's voice pierced a haze of pain. "I'm Dr. Greaves. We're here to ensure both you and your baby are well taken care of. Just focus on your breathing, all right?" Eloise, barely managing, nodded as she recalled her prenatal class's breathing techniques, though they seemed a distant memory amidst the chaos. The paramedics smoothly transitioned her to the delivery bed as nurses swarmed to attach monitors and assess her condition. "Everyone, clear out except for Nurse Olivia," Dr. Greaves instructed, a firm edge to his voice. The room thinned out, leaving only Dr. Greaves, a visibly nervous Nurse Olivia, and Eloise, who was battling escalating contractions. "Are you certain, Doctor?" Olivia's voice wavered. It was her first time leading in the delivery room. Dr. Greaves softened slightly. "Don't worry, Olivia. This is your moment. Just follow my lead, and you'll do just fine." As the chaos subsided, the delivery room's atmosphere shifted to a more intimate setting. Eloise, in excruciating pain, Dr. Greaves exuding calm authority, and Nurse Olivia, her hand a comforting presence. "Steady your breaths, Eloise," Olivia soothed. "You're doing wonderfully." Grasping Olivia's hand, Eloise concentrated on her guidance. As the next contraction surged, a profound urge to push overtook her. "It's time," she gasped out. Dr. Greaves positioned himself, ready. "All right, Eloise, give it everything you have on the next wave," he instructed. Olivia supported her back. With a primal effort, Eloise pushed, her voice echoing a scream of raw power. "Good, Eloise. The head is visible," Dr. Greaves announced. Moments felt like eternity. "Push again, Eloise. It's crucial now." Summoning every ounce of strength, Eloise bore down fiercely, but as the baby's shoulder appeared, her energy waned. Overcome by pain, she felt her resolve faltering. "Keep pushing, Eloise," Dr. Greaves urged. "You're nearly there. We need to deliver your baby now." But Eloise struggled to muster the strength needed. Her pushes grew feeble, her breathing short and labored. Dr. Greaves, his expression marked by concern, observed closely. "It appears we're facing stalled labor," he declared, his voice laced with worry. "This could lead to significant bleeding and endanger both mother and child. We need to act." He turned to Nurse Olivia. "Prepare an oxytocin drip. We need to enhance her contractions." As Olivia moved to execute the order, Dr. Greaves explained to Eloise, "We're administering medication to boost your labor. If this proves inadequate, We might need to proceed with vacuum extraction. Do you consent?" Eloise, grappling with the pain, gave a faint nod. "Anything," she gasped. "Just help me." The oxytocin was administered, yet it seemed only to heighten Eloise's discomfort without advancing the labor. Dr. Greaves's brow furrowed deeper. "We must proceed to vacuum extraction," he decided. "Nurse Olivia, ready the vacuum extractor." As Olivia prepared the equipment, Dr. Greaves turned to Eloise, explaining, "I'm going to administer pain relief now. It will help ease the pain and relax you. During your next contraction, I need you to push, and we will assist with the vacuum." Eloise nodded, desperate for any form of relief. As the medication took effect, a wave of calm washed over her, dulling the pain and allowing her to focus on Dr. Greaves's instructions. "All right, Eloise." He positioned the vacuum. "On your next contraction, push with all you have." With a monumental effort, Eloise pushed. She felt a peculiar sliding sensation, and then, alarmingly, the room fell silent. No cry from her baby. Panicked, she looked up. "Why isn't he crying?" Her voice raspy with fear. "What's wrong?" Dr. Greaves worked swiftly, his focus intense as he gently tapped the baby's back. "Nurse Olivia, get the resuscitation gear ready. We may need it," he commanded, tension in his voice. Eloise attempted to rise, only to be hit by a wave of dizziness, the room spinning, voices fading. "Doctor, she's losing a lot of blood." Nurse Olivia's distant voice called out. Dr. Greaves's steady voice cut through the confusion. "Stay with us, Eloise. We're administering something for the bleeding and pain. Just hold on." A warmth spread through Eloise's veins, dulling the pain but dimming her consciousness. As she tried to inquire about her baby, her words slurred, her mouth heavy. The last thing she heard before darkness engulfed her was Dr. Greaves's voice. That's it, but it was unclear if he spoke to her or about her baby. As consciousness faded, Eloise's mind raced with questions about her child. Had she heard a cry, any sign of life? Waking was gradual, the stark lights of the labor room replaced by softer hospital illumination. The absence of her baby hit her anew, anxiety surging. With shaky hands, she pressed the SOS button, her heart pounding as she awaited a response. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Nurse Olivia but another nurse, her demeanor composed yet somber. "Where's my baby?" Eloise asked, her voice hoarse with desperation. The nurse's expression softened, her voice gentle yet firm. "Miss Carter, I'm so sorry. Your baby didn't survive." The words crushed Eloise, leaving her gasping for air, struggling against her restraints. "No, that can't be right. I need to see him. Please, bring the doctor." As the nurse nodded and exited, Eloise was left alone, her thoughts racing. She fixated on Dr. Greaves's last words. That's it, trying to recall if she had heard her baby cry. The fading effects of the medication blurred her memories, leaving her uncertain, her grief mingling with confusion. Something felt wrong as she awaited Dr. Greaves, her sorrow intertwined with an unsettling sense of doubt. But she couldn't quite grasp what was amiss. The uncertainty only heightened her distress, leaving her adrift in a sea of loss, filled with unanswered questions. Morning light streamed through the hospital room's window, casting an almost ethereal glow that starkly contrasted with the grim reality she faced. Eloise lay in her bed, her body aching, her mind clouded from the ordeal she had endured. The room felt cold and impersonal, a harsh reminder of the loss she had suffered. The door creaked open, causing Eloise's heart to leap into her throat as Dr. Greaves entered, followed closely by Nurse Olivia. The nurse carried a small, white-wrapped bundle, and Eloise felt a surge of conflicting emotions: hope, fear, and profound sadness. Dr. Greaves approached her bedside, his expression one of professional calm. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice gentle yet clinical, How are you feeling this morning?" Eloise struggled to find her voice, her throat raw from her earlier cries. I don't know," she whispered. "Where's my baby? Please, I need to see him," the nurse earlier said. Dr. Greaves exchanged a glance with Nurse Olivia before nodding solemnly. "Of course," he replied. "Nurse Olivia has brought him for you." As Nurse Olivia stepped forward, Eloise's world narrowed to the small bundle in her arms. With trembling hands, she reached out, and Olivia carefully transferred the infant into her embrace. The moment Eloise held her child, she knew something was terribly wrong. The bundle was too light, too still. With shaking fingers, she pulled back the blanket, and a gasp escaped her lips. The baby's skin was a deep, unnatural purple, his tiny features frozen in an eternal stillness, his body ice cold against her warm skin, a stark reminder that this was not a living child, but one who had already been in the morgue. Tears welled up in Eloise's eyes as she traced her finger along her son's cheek. The skin felt waxy and unreal beneath her touch. This moment, which should have been filled with the joy of new life, was instead a heartbreaking encounter with death. "What happened?" Eloise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't tear her eyes away from her child's face, trying to memorize every detail, even in its unnatural state. Dr. Greaves cleared his throat, his words practiced yet carrying a hint of sympathy. "It was a boy," he began, his tone professional but empathetic. "There were complications immediately after birth. His heart rate dropped dangerously low, and despite our best efforts at resuscitation, we were unable to revive him." Eloise nodded numbly, her mind struggling to process the information. She looked up at Dr. Greaves, her eyes searching his face for more answers. "But why is he so purple? And so cold? How long has it been?" she inquired. Dr. Greaves shifted uncomfortably, exchanging another quick glance with Nurse Olivia. "You were unconscious for about 4 hours after the delivery," he explained. "Given the circumstances, we had to move him to the morgue shortly after, which explains his current condition." The word morgue struck Eloise like a physical blow. Her baby, the child she had carried and loved for 9 months, had been alone in that cold, sterile place while she was unconscious. The thought was nearly unbearable. "I'm truly sorry for your loss, Miss Carter," Dr. Greaves added, his voice softening slightly. Eloise barely heard him, her attention focused entirely on her son. She traced the curve of his nose, the shape of his lips, trying to imagine what he might have looked like alive and healthy. Can I have some time alone with him?" she asked, her voice breaking. Dr. Greaves hesitated, his professional demeanour slipping for just a moment. "Of course," he said after a pause, "but I must insist that Nurse Olivia remain. It's hospital policy, for safety reasons. We've had unfortunate incidents in the past with traumatic situations." The contrast between his clinical detachment and Eloise's raw grief created a palpable tension in the room. As Dr. Greaves exited, the atmosphere shifted, becoming heavy with unspoken emotions. Nurse Olivia moved closer, her presence a silent offer of support. Eloise barely noticed her, lost in her own world of grief and memories. "I had so many dreams for you," Eloise whispered to her son, her voice choked with tears. "I imagined your first smile, your first steps. I wondered what your voice would sound like, what kind of person you'd grow up to be." As she spoke, her mind wandered back to the early days of her pregnancy. "You know," she said, her voice trembling, "I was so scared when I first found out about you. It wasn't an easy time in my life. My ex-husband kept coming back into my life, years after our divorce. I was afraid, unsure if I could do this on my own. But then, as time passed, I fell in love with you. I started to dream of our future together." Eloise's fingers continued to trace her son's features, memorizing every detail. The room felt suspended in time, the outside world fading away as mother and child shared this final, heartbreaking moment together. However, you can request it as an additional purchase from the pharmacy if necessary. Nurse Olivia assisted Eloise in sitting up cautiously on the bed, reminding her to avoid strenuous activities to aid her recovery. After giving her the morning's medications, an ibuprofen and an antibiotic, Olivia informed Eloise that she could leave the hospital as soon as she felt ready after her current 4-drip, which was nearly finished. She suggested that Eloise might find more comfort at home. As Eloise contemplated going home, she suddenly realized that she had rushed to the hospital without any personal belongings, not even the bare essentials. "My phone," Eloise exclaimed abruptly, recalling that she had it upon her arrival the previous night. "Do you know where it is?" Nurse Olivia nodded and went to a secure cabinet, explaining, "Another nurse secured it here last night," as she retrieved the device. Taking her phone, Eloise felt reconnected to the outside world, a world that now seemed irrevocably changed. She powered on her phone, relieved to find it still had plenty of battery. The screen's soft glow illuminated her face in the dim hospital room, casting shadows that accentuated the exhaustion etched into her features. As she scrolled through the missed calls and messages, the reality of her situation began to sink in. Nurse Olivia approached the bed, her steps soft on the linoleum floor. With practiced ease, she removed the 4 infusion from Eloise's arm, the now empty bag hanging limp on the stand beside the bed. "There you go," Olivia said softly, pressing a small cotton ball to the insertion site. Eloise flexed her arm, wincing slightly at the soreness. Her voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Everything feels surreal. I was with child, but now I don't." Olivia nodded sympathetically, her kind eyes filled with understanding. "That's perfectly normal after what you've been through. Is there anyone coming to pick you up? Family or friends?" Eloise shook her head, a wave of loneliness washing over her. "No, I'll just take a taxi." Concern flickered across Olivia's face. "Are you sure? I'd be happy to help with the taxi fare if you need, since you don't have your bag." "No, thank you," Eloise interrupted gently, managing a small, grateful smile. "I have money at home, or I can pay from my phone. I appreciate the offer, though." Olivia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, if you're sure. Just remember, it's okay to accept help sometimes." She began gathering her things, preparing to leave. "Wait!" Eloise called out suddenly, surprising even herself with the urgency in her voice. Olivia turned back, her eyebrows raised in question. Eloise took a deep breath, her heart pounding. The request she was about to make felt simultaneously crucial and impossible. I need to ask you something," she began, her voice trembling. Olivia moved closer to the bed, her full attention on Eloise. "What is it?" "I didn't have enough time," Eloise said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "To say goodbye, I mean. Is there any way I could see my baby one last time before I leave? I'd like to take a picture with him." Her voice broke on the last words, tears welling up in her eyes. "Please, it would mean so much to me." The compassion in Olivia's eyes was tempered with hesitation. "Oh, Eloise," she said softly, "I'm so sorry, but the baby has been taken to the morgue. We can't take patients there, and I don't have access. We'd need to contact the morgue staff." Eloise felt a wave of desperation wash over her. She reached out, grasping Olivia's hand. "Please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "This would be my last chance. If I had known where my phone was earlier, I would have taken a picture in the room. I need to keep something, a memory of him." Her words came faster now, tinged with urgency. Even if he didn't make it into this world, He was alive for 9 months inside me. Please help me." Olivia's resolve visibly wavered, her professional demeanor cracking in the face of Eloise's raw emotion. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" she asked softly. Eloise nodded emphatically, hope blooming in her chest. "I have to do this. Please." After a moment of internal struggle, Olivia sighed. "I'll try to help," she said, "but I can't promise anything. This is against hospital policy and should be off the record." She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen as she typed out a message. The room fell silent, save for the soft tapping of Olivia's fingers and Eloise's shaky breathing. Each second felt like an eternity as they waited for a response. Finally, Olivia's phone buzzed. She read the message, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Okay," she said after a moment, looking up at Eloise. "I think I can make this happen, but we need to be quick and discreet. Can you walk?" Eloise nodded, already pushing herself up from the bed. Her body protested, muscles sore and weak, but determination gave her strength. Olivia helped her into a robe, then led her out of the room. The hospital corridors seemed different now, quieter, more ominous. Their footsteps echoed softly as they made their way through the maze-like hallways, Olivia guiding them with purpose. Eloise's heart raced, a mix of anticipation and fear coursing through her veins. But he paused, his expression softening as he gazed at Eloise. "I truly am sorry for your loss," he murmured. As Dr. Greaves exited the morgue, the heavy door shut behind him with a resounding thud. Eloise was left in the quiet with Nurse Olivia and her son, the silence punctuated only by the low hum of the refrigeration units. With trembling hands, Eloise approached the cold metal table where her baby rested. The stark contrast between the warmth of her skin and the icy cold of her son's body sent shivers through her. Gently, reverently, she lifted him, holding him close to her chest as she had often dreamed of during her pregnancy. "Eloise," she whispered softly, her voice barely audible, "could you please take a photo for me?" Nurse Olivia nodded, her eyes moist with tears yet unshed, as she took Eloise's phone. The camera's flash briefly lit up the room, capturing the poignant scene of a mother's final embrace with her child. As Olivia snapped several more photos from different angles, Eloise's attention stayed fixed on her son. She traced the curve of his nose, the shape of his lips, memorizing every feature despite the unnatural purple hue of his skin, finding traces of herself in his tiny face. "You're so beautiful," Eloise whispered, her tears gently falling onto her son's still face. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry we didn't have more time." The burden of her grief was overwhelming. Reluctantly, and knowing their time was fleeting, Eloise gave her son one last kiss on his forehead. "Goodbye, my love," she murmured, her voice cracking with sorrow. With a heavy heart, she handed her son back to Nurse Olivia, who carefully placed him back into the open freezer compartment before sealing it. As they prepared to leave the morgue, Eloise turned to Olivia, her eyes red but filled with profound gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice laden with emotion. "I'm sorry for putting you in this position." Olivia shook her head, offering a sad smile. "Actually, I'm not that surprised," she confessed softly, her voice a gentle echo in the still room. "My friend in the morgue has mentioned several times that grieving mothers often request to see their babies and take pictures. It might seem morbid to some, but it's a reality for many patients. I understand the need for closure. Typically, they bring the baby to the hospital room, but I knew your time earlier was so limited." They exited the morgue, the door closing with finality. The hospital corridors now seemed overly bright after the dimness of the morgue. As they walked, Eloise was lost in thought, her mind replaying the events of the past night. Again and again, usually, they bring the baby to the hospital room. "But I understood that your time earlier was very limited," Olivia said gently as she guided Eloise through the maze-like hallways to the front desk to complete the discharge paperwork. At the administration desk, Eloise explained her situation in a voice that sounded distant even to her own ears. "I don't have my wallet. I was brought in as an emergency," she explained. The staff member nodded understandingly, her fingers rapidly typing on the keyboard. "No problem. We'll send the bill to your address. Just fill out this registration form for now." As Eloise mechanically filled out the paperwork, her hand smoothly gliding across the page, an unsettling feeling gnawed at her. She was sure she was overlooking something crucial, but the dull ache in her head and the fog of lingering medication prevented her from focusing long enough to pinpoint what it was. Once the forms were completed, the staff member handed Eloise a small bag containing her medication, take-home kit, and discharge instructions. "Take care, Miss Carter," she said kindly. "And again, we're so sorry for your loss." Eloise nodded numbly, clutching the bag to her chest as if it were a lifeline. She turned to Nurse Olivia, who had remained by her side throughout the process. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. "I don't know how I would have managed this without you." Olivia squeezed her arm gently. "You're stronger than you know, Eloise. Take care of yourself, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything." With a final goodbye to Nurse Olivia, Eloise stepped out of the hospital and into the bright afternoon sunlight. The world outside seemed too loud, too colourful, too alive, a stark contrast to the grief that weighed heavily on her heart. She made her way to the taxi stand, her steps slow and unsteady. As she waited for a cab, she pulled out her phone, the weight of it in her hand a reminder of the precious photos it now contained. She scrolled through her missed calls and messages, her heart clenching as she saw several from her boyfriend Corey and her colleagues, all wondering where she was and if everything was okay. The task of explaining what had happened felt overwhelming. How could she possibly convey the joy, fear, pain, and devastating loss she had experienced in just the past 24 hours? In the end, she sent only a brief message to Corey. "Something's happened. I'll explain everything when you have time to call. I need to talk to you." As a taxi pulled up, Eloise climbed in, giving her home address in a voice that sounded foreign to her own ears. As the car pulled away from the curb, she leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city pass by in a blur. Life continued as normal for everyone else, while Eloise's world had been irrevocably changed. She closed her eyes, one hand resting protectively over her now empty womb, the other clutching her phone with its precious cargo of final memories. The taxi arrived at Eloise's apartment building, the familiar facade now seeming strangely alien. Eloise fumbled with her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she completed the mobile payment to the driver. As the car drove away, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling oddly disconnected from her surroundings. Taking a deep breath, Eloise pushed open the heavy glass door of the building's entrance. The lobby, with its faux marble floors and generic potted plants, felt surreal after the sterile environment of the hospital. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space as she made her way to the elevator. Inside the elevator, Eloise caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored wall. Her reflection startled her. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes, hair limp and tangled. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. As the elevator ascended, she closed her eyes, trying to center herself for what lay ahead. The soft ding of the elevator reaching her floor jolted Eloise back to the present. She stepped out into the hallway, her legs feeling weak and unsteady. The walk to her apartment door seemed to take an eternity, each step a monumental effort. As she entered her apartment, the silence hit her like a physical force. The space that had once felt cozy and full of promise now seemed to echo with emptiness. Her gaze fell on the corner where she had collapsed in labor pain just the night before. The memory felt both recent and impossibly distant, as if it had happened to someone else. Eloise made her way to her bedroom, her steps heavy and slow. The sight that greeted her there brought a fresh wave of grief crashing over her. Next to her bed stood the carefully prepared bassinet, its soft blankets and stuffed animals a cruel reminder of the future that would never come to pass. Nearby sat her hospital bag, packed a month ago with such hope and excitement. Eloise approached it slowly, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. With trembling hands, she unzipped the bag, revealing its contents: tiny onesies, diapers, a breast pump, a coming-home outfit she had chosen with such care. Each item was a dagger to her heart, a tangible reminder of her loss. Unable to bear the sight any longer, Eloise sank onto her bed, overwhelmed by the quiet of the apartment. It amplified her solitude, forcing her to confront the magnitude of her loss. As the effects of the medication continued to fade, she became acutely aware of her body's discomfort and the gnawing pangs of hunger. Forcing herself to her feet, Eloise made her way to the kitchen. She opened the fridge, the cool air washing over her as she surveyed its contents. Her eyes fell on a container of leftover dinner, the one she had the day before the emergency. Mechanically, barely registering her actions, she transferred it to a plate and placed it in the microwave. Eloise leaned against the counter, her mind a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and memories. The sharp ding of the microwave finishing startled her, and she jumped slightly, her nerves raw and frayed. Eloise carried her plate to the living room, settling onto the couch. She ate without tasting, her movements robotic as she lifted the fork to her mouth again and again. With her physical hunger somewhat sated, Eloise found herself drawn back to her phone. She opened the gallery, her finger hovering over the folder containing the photos taken in the morgue. Taking a deep breath, she tapped on the first image. The sight of her son, so still and perfect in her arms, brought fresh tears to her eyes. As she swiped through the photos, studying each one intently, details began nagging at her consciousness. She remembered the other baby in the morgue, the one Dr. Greaves had quickly hidden away. Why had it been laid out next to her son, and why had her deceased baby not been in a freezer box to begin with? As the fog of medication lifted further from her mind, more questions arose. Why had her baby looked so purple compared to the other infant if they had both passed away recently, as Dr. Greaves had implied? Shouldn't they have looked similar? But as quickly as these thoughts surfaced, Eloise pushed them away. Surely her mind was playing tricks on her, grief and trauma distorting her perceptions. Doctors were held to high moral standards. They wouldn't do anything unethical, would they? Shaking her head to clear these unsettling thoughts, Eloise made her way to the bathroom. She turned on the shower, letting the steam fill the small space as she undressed. As she stepped under the hot water, she felt the tension in her muscles begin to ease slightly. She stood there for a long time, letting the water wash over her, imagining it could somehow cleanse her of her grief and confusion. As the steam cleared from the mirror, Eloise found herself staring at her reflection. Her eyes were drawn to the features she had always taken for granted. She reached for her phone, which she had left on the bathroom counter, and opened the gallery once more. This time, as she looked at the photos of her baby, something struck her that she hadn't noticed before. The baby's features, the black hair, the shape of the nose, the curve of the mouth, were markedly different from her own. She tried to remember the other baby more clearly, a nagging feeling that its hair had been fair. A chill ran down her spine as the realization hit her. Heart pounding, Eloise rushed out of the bathroom, barely remembering to wrap a towel around herself. She made her way to the living room, where a large cabinet stood against the wall. With trembling hands, she pulled open one of the drawers and rifled through it until she found what she was looking for, a large A4 envelope. She took the envelope to her bedroom, scattering its contents across the bed. Papers spilled out, and Eloise began to frantically scan through them, searching for one document in particular, the sperm donor profile. As she read, memories flooded back. She and Corey had spent hours poring over donor profiles, carefully selecting criteria that matched their own characteristics. Corey's medical condition meant he couldn't father a child, but they had wanted the baby to resemble them both as much as possible. One of the key criteria they had insisted on was blonde hair, like both of them had. Her eyes locked onto the relevant section of the document. There it was, in black and white. Hair color, blonde. Eloise felt her world tilt on its axis. How could her baby have had such dark hair if the donor was blonde? Her mind raced with possibilities. Had there been a mix-up at the fertility clinic? Had she been given a different donor's sperm than the one she and Corey had chosen? The implications were staggering. Just as the weight of these new questions threatened to overwhelm her, Eloise was hit with a wave of physical discomfort. A sharp pain radiated through her abdomen and breast, reminding her of her postpartum state. She winced, one hand going to her stomach as she tried to steady her breathing. The pain brought her back to the present moment, to the reality of her physical needs. She remembered Nurse Olivia mentioning an anti-log supplement for breast milk production. In her emotional state at the hospital, she had forgotten to request it. Deciding she needed to address this, she put the papers back in the envelope. Eloise quickly dried off and dressed. The idea of leaving her apartment again and going back to the hospital so soon filled her with anxiety, but she knew she needed to take care of herself, if only for the sake of her lost child. She gathered her bag, double-checking that she had her phone and keys. As she was about to leave, her gaze fell on a framed ultrasound picture on her bedside table. The sight of it made her pause, a lump forming in her throat. After a moment's hesitation, she picked it up and slipped it into her bag. It felt wrong to leave without some tangible reminder of her son. Eloise stepped into the elevator, the faint hum of its descent echoing in the enclosed space as her thoughts fixated on returning to the hospital for the supplement she had forgotten. The mirrored walls reflected her pale, drawn face, and she smoothed her hair, as if tidying her appearance might bring some semblance of control to the day. Once in the lobby, she opened her phone, navigating to her taxi app with practiced efficiency. The glow of the phone illuminated her face, and her brow furrowed slightly as she glanced at the fare estimate. It wasn't cheap, and for a moment she hesitated. The anti-log supplement wasn't exclusive to the hospital pharmacy. Any well-stocked drugstore would carry it, and she could save time and money by heading to one closer to home. The logical solution was clear. However, Eloise found herself lingering, her thumb hovering uncertainly over the confirm ride button on her phone. The stark, sterile corridors of the hospital flashed through her mind, pulling at her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't just the supplement. It was something more, a faint but persistent pull like a whisper she couldn't ignore. Perhaps she might find more answers about the lingering questions regarding her baby's passing. Resolutely, she tapped the button. The screen flashed a confirmation, and her ride was soon on its way. The decision didn't feel entirely practical, but she dismissed the thought, rationalizing it as a matter of convenience. As the minutes ticked by, Eloise wandered toward the mailroom, a habitual check she thought more to kill time than anything else. The scent of paper and ink greeted her as she opened her mailbox. Among the usual clutter of bills and flyers, a plain, unmarked envelope without a return address stood out. Eloise picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It was heavier than she expected, as if it contained more than just a simple letter. Curiosity sparked, but she slipped it into her bag, deciding it could wait as her cab would be arriving any moment. She returned to the lobby, adjusting her bag over her shoulder as she spotted the taxi pulling up to the curb outside. The crisp air greeted her as she stepped out, her mind swirling with questions she couldn't yet frame. Eloise climbed into the back seat, her focus shifting between the road ahead and the faint tug of the envelope against her side, both leading her back to the hospital. As the car pulled away from the curb, she reached into her bag for the mysterious envelope. She was about to open it when her phone suddenly rang. Eloise's heart skipped a beat as she saw Corey's name on the screen. Taking a deep breath, she answered the call. "Eloise," Corey's voice came through, filled with worry. "What's going on? Why didn't you reply to any of my texts last night?" Eloise glanced at the taxi driver, acutely aware of his presence. Despite her discomfort at discussing such private matters in this setting, she knew Corey deserved an explanation. I went into emergency labor last night," she began, her voice trembling. "But Corey, the baby, he didn't make it. They said it was heart failure." She could hear Corey's sharp intake of breath. "Oh, Eloise, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. I was so far away here in Vietnam on business, and you were alone." Eloise continued, recounting the baby's condition as explained by the doctor and her interaction with Nurse Olivia, who had assisted her in visiting the morgue. She shared every detail, right up to realizing she'd forgotten the supplement and her current trip back to the hospital. As she spoke, she caught the taxi driver's gaze in the rearview mirror, his expression a blend of sympathy, surprise, and unease, as though he wasn't sure how to respond. "I'm taking the first flight available," Corey said firmly. "I'll be there with you tomorrow, okay? Just hold on and take care of yourself until then. Call me if you need anything. I love you." After ending the call, Eloise felt emotionally drained. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city pass by in a blur. After a few moments, she remembered the envelope in her lap. With slightly trembling hands, she opened it. Inside, she found a love letter and a check. As she read the heartfelt words of encouragement and support for her and the baby, a small smile tugged at her lips despite her grief. She had received similar letters throughout her pregnancy, always unsigned but clearly from Corey. It touched her that he had gone to such lengths to support her from afar. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Eloise took a picture of the letter with her phone. She composed a message to Corey. "This is the 10th anonymous letter you've sent me monthly since I got pregnant. I've known it was you all along, even though we kept quiet about it for so long. It's so thoughtful, but you don't need to keep doing this. Thank you for standing by us, even from afar. I still remember when you agreed to us having a baby through a donor, despite the challenges of our long-distance relationship. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." As she hit send, the taxi pulled up to the hospital entrance. Eloise paid the driver and stepped out, the familiar facade of St. Mary's looming before her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. With a mixture of determination and apprehension, she walked through the sliding doors back into the place where her world had changed forever just hours before. She headed straight for the pharmacy, intent on getting the anti-log supplement Nurse Olivia had mentioned. At the pharmacy counter, Eloise placed her order and was directed to wait. She turned to look at the waiting area, noticing the crowd of patients and visitors occupying most of the chairs. The thought of sitting among strangers, their curious glances and potential small talk, felt overwhelming. She needed space, quiet. "I think I'll walk around a bit," she murmured, more to herself than to the pharmacist. Her feet carried her almost unconsciously towards the maternity wing. The corridors here were quieter, the soft beeping of monitors and occasional cry of a newborn creating a surreal atmosphere. Eloise found herself drawn to the nursery window, her hand resting on the glass as she gazed at the rows of bassinets. Each tiny face she saw brought a fresh wave of grief, a reminder of what she had lost. But as she stood there, something else began to stir within her, a nagging doubt, a growing suspicion that something wasn't right about her own experience. Lost in her thoughts, Eloise almost missed the familiar figure striding purposefully down the hallway. It was Dr. Greaves, his white coat billowing slightly as he walked. Without really thinking about why, Eloise found herself following him at a distance, curiosity overriding her initial instinct to avoid him. She trailed Dr. Greaves through several corridors, always staying just far enough behind to avoid detection. As they turned a corner into a less busy area of the hospital, Eloise's heart nearly stopped. There, greeting Dr. Greaves with familiar warmth, was a face she had hoped never to see again, her ex-husband, Michael. Eloise quickly ducked behind a supply cart, her pulse racing. What was Michael doing here, and how did he know Dr. Greaves? She strained to hear their conversation, catching only fragments of words spoken in low, conspiratorial tones. The two men entered a nearby room, the door closing behind them with a soft click. Eloise stood frozen, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had just witnessed. The abusive ex-husband she had fought so hard to escape, somehow connected to the doctor who had delivered her supposedly stillborn child? It seemed impossible, yet here was the evidence before her eyes. As she debated whether to move closer to try and overhear more, conflicting emotions warred within her. It had taken a court order and a hefty fine to finally keep Michael away from her. Only then had Eloise felt truly free, allowing her to meet and fall in love with Corey. The thought that Michael might be back in her life, even peripherally, made her feel sick. Fear of encountering Michael again battled with her growing determination to uncover the truth about her baby's death. This unexpected connection added another layer of mystery to an already confusing situation. Yet curiosity and a growing sense that something wasn't right compelled her forward. This was a public hospital. She reasoned Michael couldn't do anything to her here, and if he was somehow involved in her care, she needed to know. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Eloise approached the room quietly. She positioned herself near the door, straining to hear the conversation inside. Just as she was about to lean closer, a hand grasped her arm, pulling her away. Eloise stepped back, her heart in her throat, only to find herself face to face with Nurse Olivia. "Mrs. Eloise, what are you doing here?" "I thought you went home," Olivia whispered, guiding Eloise away from the door and into a nearby empty room. "Please follow me. There's something I need to say." Once inside, Olivia's expression changed from concern to determination. "There's something you need to know, Mrs. Eloise," she said, her voice low and serious, yet anxious at the same time. "It's about the medication Dr. Greaves used during your labor. I thought I wouldn't have the chance to see you again, but here you are." Eloise felt her stomach drop. "What about it? What do you mean? You're starting to scare me, Nurse Olivia." Olivia took a deep breath. "While I was cleaning up the labor room last night after you were moved, I noticed the empty medication bottles. The pain relief medication you were given. It was fentanyl, an opioid." Eloise's brow furrowed in confusion. "Is that not normal?" "Sometimes opioids are used for pain relief during labor," Olivia explained. "The dosage you were given," Olivia said, her voice trembling slightly, "was far higher than standard protocol." She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small evidence bag containing an empty medication bottle. "I kept this. I knew something wasn't right." Eloise's eyes fixed on the bottle, her mind spinning. "What does this mean for me? And my baby?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia's expression was grave. "Using opioids during labor can sometimes affect a baby's breathing. It can make them unresponsive after birth." Her words hit Eloise like a physical blow. "Are you saying," Eloise's voice broke, her heart pounding, "are you saying this is why my baby died? Not heart failure, like Dr. Greaves told me." Olivia shook her head quickly, her hesitation evident. "It's unlikely that the opioid caused the baby's death. Normally, babies are just very drowsy and take longer to wake up." She faltered, her voice breaking. "But—" Olivia's face was pale, her hands trembling. "But what?" Eloise pressed, her breath catching. "What aren't you telling me?" Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you this morning," she said, her voice cracking. "I was scared to speak up. I'm not as experienced as the other nurses, but I was in the room when your baby was born." He didn't cry, and his heart rate was low. "I didn't know about the fentanyl at the time. I was preparing the vacuum extractor when Dr. Greaves administered it. So when he declared the baby stillborn—" She hesitated, guilt etched across her face. "I believed him." Eloise felt the ground beneath her shift, her world tilting dangerously. But you're not sure now?" Olivia nodded, her expression tormented. "Earlier, when I saw Dr. Greaves carrying that box out of the morgue, I had doubts. Then the morgue staff, my friend, told me he hasn't returned the access card even now. That's not normal. Why would the examination of a stillborn baby take so long?" Eloise's mind raced, the pieces falling into place as she recalled the morgue, the two babies she had seen. Could it be possible? Was there even a small chance her baby was still alive? "Olivia," Eloise said, her voice trembling with urgency, "I need your help. We have to find out what's really going on. If there's even the slightest chance my baby is alive, or that there's been foul play, I need to know." With renewed determination, Eloise and Olivia made their way back to the room where Michael and Dr. Greaves had entered. Eloise's heart thundered in her chest, a mix of fear and desperate hope making her stomach churn. "We need to be careful," Olivia whispered, her eyes darting nervously. "If what we suspect is true, they could be dangerous." Eloise nodded, her gaze locked on the door. As they drew closer, she heard muffled voices inside. Cautiously, she peered through the small window in the door. What she saw made her gasp audibly. There, in a hospital bassinet, was a baby, alive, healthy-looking, and unmistakably familiar. The infant had blonde hair, just like Eloise's, and features that mirrored her own. It was a stark contrast to the dark-haired baby she had been shown in the morgue. "Oh my God," Eloise breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Olivia, I think that's my baby." Olivia peered through the window, her eyes widening in shock. "The fentanyl's effects must have worn off," she whispered. "The baby's awake now." Anger and desperation surged through Eloise as she watched Dr. Greaves hand the baby to Michael. "We have to get in there," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Wait," Olivia hissed, grabbing her arm. "We need to be smart about this. If we barge in, they might do something drastic. We need proof." Eloise forced herself to breathe deeply, nodding despite the storm raging inside her. "You're right. But how?" "The hospital records," Olivia said suddenly. "If we can access them, we might find evidence of what's really happened." They hurried to the nearest nurse's station. Olivia's fingers flew over the keyboard as she accessed the hospital's database. Simultaneously, she pulled out her phone and called her friend in the morgue. "Lindsay, I need you to check something for me," Olivia said urgently. "The baby that was brought in last night, the one Dr. Greaves said was stillborn. Can you confirm the details?" As Olivia cross-referenced information with her friend, Eloise's eyes stayed glued to the computer screen. Her heart felt like it might burst from her chest. After what felt like hours, Olivia turned to her, her face pale and tense. "Eloise," she began gently, her voice steady but strained, "the records confirm it. The dark-haired baby in the morgue isn't yours. That child passed away 3 days ago. Your baby, the one with blonde hair, was admitted to the morgue last night. But," Olivia pointed to a data entry, "no freezer box was ever allocated for him. Instead, he was placed in nursery room number 5. Nursery room 5? Eloise repeated, her voice trembling. Olivia nodded. It's a room used for rescued babies and is usually left vacant. The weight of the revelation hit Eloise like a physical blow. Her baby was alive, and Michael, her abusive ex-husband, was trying to steal him. "We need to call the police," Eloise said, her voice a mix of rage and fear. "Right now." Olivia nodded, already dialing. "I'll do it," she said. "You stay here. Don't confront them yet. Let the authorities handle this." As Olivia spoke quietly but urgently to the police, Eloise's mind churned with questions. How had Michael orchestrated this? Why was Dr. Greaves involved? And most importantly, how could she ensure her baby's safety? The wait for the police was agonizing. Every second dragged, her imagination conjuring countless scenarios of what could go wrong. Finally, Olivia ended the call and turned to Eloise. "They're on their way," she said. "They've advised us to stay put and not confront Michael or Dr. Greaves. But they're coming, Eloise. We're going to get your baby back," Olivia assured her. Eloise nodded, tears of relief and anger mingling on her cheeks as they waited for the authorities to arrive. She steeled herself for the confrontation to come. Her son was alive, and she was determined to fight with everything she had to bring him home where he belonged. As they waited for the police, Eloise and Olivia cautiously made their way back to the room where Michael and Dr. Greaves were with the baby. They positioned themselves near the door, careful to stay out of sight while still being able to observe through the small window. Inside, Eloise could see Michael holding the baby, a triumphant smile on his face as he spoke to Dr. Greaves. The sight of her ex-husband with her child made her blood boil, but she forced herself to remain calm, knowing that any rash actions could put her baby at risk. "I can't believe this is really happening," Eloise whispered to Olivia. "How could they do this?" Olivia squeezed her arms supportively. "I don't know, but we're going to make sure they don't get away with it. The police will be here soon." "That's my son," Eloise said, her voice breaking. "I can see it now. He looks just like me." Olivia nodded. The fentanyl side effects must have worn off completely. "He looks perfectly healthy now." Just then, they heard the sound of approaching footsteps and turned to see several police officers making their way down the corridor, led by a detective. The detective approached them, his expression serious. "Are you Eloise Carter?" he asked quietly. Eloise nodded, relief washing over her. "Yes, that's me. Please, my baby is in there with my ex-husband. He's trying to steal him." The detective nodded, motioning for his officers to take position. "We're going to handle this carefully," he assured her. "Can you tell me briefly what's happened?" Quickly, Eloise and Olivia explained the situation, the fentanyl overdose, the baby swap, and Michael's involvement. The detective listened intently, his frown deepening as he heard the details. "All right," he said finally. "We're going to go in now, Miss Carter. I need you to stay out here with one of my officers. Nurse, if you could come with us to help with the baby, that would be helpful." Eloise wanted to protest, to insist on going in herself, but she knew the detective was right. She nodded reluctantly, watching as the police prepared to enter the room. Despite the detective's earlier advice to stay back, Eloise couldn't bear to be a passive observer any longer. When the officers moved to enter the room, Eloise followed closely behind, her heart pounding in her chest. The door burst open, and Eloise found herself face to face with Michael and Dr. Greaves. The shock on their faces quickly turned to anger as they realized they had been caught. "What is the meaning of this?" Dr. Greaves sputtered, his usual composure cracking. Eloise stepped forward, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have evidence that this is my baby," she said, pointing to the infant in Michael's arms. "What are you doing here, Michael? And you, Dr. Greaves, what are you doing with my ex-husband? Dr. Greaves attempted to regain control of the situation. Eloise, you must be confused. You're still grieving. This is Michael's child. His wife just gave birth. That's a lie, Eloise interrupted. I remember this baby. You declared him dead and took him away in a box for examination. Nurse Olivia has confirmed that Michael isn't a registered patient, and his supposed wife isn't here either. Michael's face contorted with rage, but then, unexpectedly, he began to laugh, the sound sending chills down Eloise's spine. "Oh, Eloise," he sneered. "Did you think you could ever truly be free of me? I see you've enjoyed all my checks these past 2 years. Did you like my love letters? How many of them did you keep?" Eloise felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. "What are you talking about?" "Those were from Corey." Michael's grin widened. "You see, all these years, you've lived off my money. I still took care of you, no matter what happened between us. That's just how much I love you." Eloise's mind raced. She pulled out her phone, checking Corey's earlier message. To her horror, she saw his reply stating he had never sent any letters or money. Fury rose within her, replacing her shock. She tore up the letter and check she had found earlier, throwing the pieces to the floor. "It doesn't matter," she spat. "You've been stalking me all this time. You're sick, Michael." Michael's demeanor changed, becoming cold and calculating. "It doesn't matter now. I'm taking the child. He's rightfully mine." "What are you talking about?" Eloise demanded. "This is my baby." Michael's next words hit her like a physical blow. "I just borrowed your womb," he said smugly. "The baby has my DNA. I'm the sperm donor." Eloise felt the world spinning around her. "It can't be. You're making things up just to upset me," she said. "How is that possible?" Michael gloated, revealing the extent of his manipulation. "I've always been watching you, Eloise. I have people everywhere. I knew about your fertility treatments, your plans. I managed to ensure the sperm donor you received was mine." Eloise felt sick, her mind reeling from the implications. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice shaking. "I want a DNA test." Michael laughed again. "By all means, let's do a DNA test. But think about it, Eloise. You wouldn't have had this baby if you knew it was mine. This child is a curse to you now. What will Corey say?" Eloise was stunned to realize that Michael knew about Corey. The depth of his surveillance over her life was chilling. What else did he know? Did he have cameras in her apartment as well? Eloise felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of violation. But as her eyes fell on the baby now being gently taken by a female officer, she felt a fierce surge of love and protectiveness. The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Police officers moved swiftly, securing both Michael and Dr. Greaves. The sound of handcuffs clicking into place echoed in the suddenly quiet room. "Michael Carter, Dr. Alan Greaves, you're under arrest," one of the officers announced, his voice firm and authoritative. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the Miranda rights were being read, Eloise's attention was drawn to her son. A female officer was carefully lifting the baby from the hospital bassinet, her movements gentle and practiced. The infant stirred slightly but didn't cry, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding around him. "Miss Carter," the officer said softly, approaching Eloise, "would you like to hold your son?" Eloise nodded, her arms already reaching out. As the warm weight of her baby settled against her chest, she felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. This was real. Her son was alive, and he was back in her arms, where he belonged. No matter what Michael had done, no matter whose DNA the baby carried, this was her child. She had carried him, loved him, and nearly lost him. As the reality of the situation sank in, Eloise knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But Eloise was resolute, facing the ordeal head-on for herself and her son. As they waited for the police, other officers were busy gathering evidence. One carefully bagged the torn pieces of the letter and checked that Eloise had discarded in anger. Another was securing the fentanyl bottle handed over by Nurse Olivia, and yet another was photographing the scene, focusing on a briefcase on a nearby table. "Detective," an officer called out, attracting the lead detective's attention to the briefcase. The detective moved over, eyebrows raising as he flipped through documents inside it. "Financial records," he murmured, loud enough for Eloise to overhear. "It appears to be a trail of payments from Mr. Carter to Dr. Greaves over the last year." Eloise's stomach churned with disgust and anger, tightening her grip on her son as a shield against the harsh reality of their situation. "There's more," the detective continued, his tone somber. "Correspondence that suggests Mr. Carter has been monitoring Ms. Carter's fertility treatments for quite some time. And look here, documents related to the sperm donor selection process at the fertility clinic." Michael, who had been silent up until then, suddenly spoke up defensively. "You can't prove anything. I have connections. This will never hold up in court." The detective faced Michael, his expression stern and unwavering. "I wouldn't be so sure about that, Mr. Carter. We've got a substantial paper trail here, plus testimonies from hospital staff. You're looking at some serious charges." As Michael was escorted out of the room, still uttering threats and promises of retribution, Eloise felt a complex mix of relief and anxiety. The nightmare seemed over, but the fallout of Michael's schemes was just beginning to unravel. Dr. Greaves, in contrast to Michael's defiance, seemed deflated, his face etched with regret as he was led towards the door. "I'm sorry," he muttered to Eloise, his voice barely audible. "I never meant for it to go this far. The debt, my son's gambling problems. I didn't see another way out." Eloise found herself speechless, watching in silent anger and pity as Dr. Greaves and Michael were taken away. The detective then approached her, his demeanor softer. "Miss Carter, we'll need you to come to the station to make a full statement. If you need some time to process, we can arrange that, but—" Looking down at her son in her arms, Eloise felt a pang of anxiety at the thought of being separated from him even briefly. However, she understood the urgency. "Yes, I can do that," she responded, hesitantly. She then turned to Nurse Olivia, who had been her steadfast ally throughout this ordeal. "Olivia, would you?" Olivia stepped forward, instantly understanding. "Of course, I'll take care of him. He'll be safe with me. I promise." Reluctantly, Eloise handed her son to Olivia, whispering a soft goodbye and promising to return soon. Then, turning to Olivia, she said gratefully, "Thank you for everything, Olivia. It wasn't by chance that you were in that room last night. You helped bring my boy into the world." As the detective led Eloise out of the hospital and into the waiting police car, they headed to the station. Through the city streets, Eloise's mind raced, replaying the surreal events of the last 24 hours, feeling like a lifetime since she'd first arrived at the hospital in labor. At the station, in a quiet interview room, the detective offered her a cup of water before they began. "Take your time, Miss Carter," he said kindly. "We want to get the full picture, starting from your marriage to Michael." Eloise took a deep breath and began her story, describing the tumultuous marriage, the abuse she endured, and the harrowing divorce. She recounted how Michael stalked and harassed her for 2 years after their separation, and how it wasn't until he faced a court fine and strict restraining order that she finally felt free to move on and meet Corey, her supportive boyfriend. "How does Corey fit into this situation?" the detective inquired, jotting down notes. Eloise explained that Corey, due to a medical condition, couldn't father children naturally, leading them to choose sperm donation. "Corey has been nothing but supportive, even from overseas," she added. As the interview unfolded, Eloise detailed every aspect of her labor, the deceit uncovered, and her growing suspicions validated by the events of the day. The detective listened intently, his concern evident as he asked detailed questions to ensure all information was accurately recorded. "Ms. Carter," he said as they concluded, "given everything, we're concerned about your safety and that of your son. We'd like to arrange protective measures until we can ensure there's no further threat." Eloise nodded, feeling a chill at the prospect of more hidden threats. "Whatever you think is best to keep my son safe," she agreed, her voice resolute. As they discussed the protective measures, Eloise's phone vibrated with a message from Corey, expressing his concern and eagerness to return. Eloise stared at the text, her emotions torn between relief at his return and the dread of explaining the complex web of deceit she had unraveled. "Detective," she asked, her voice shaky, "how do I explain this to Corey?" "Just tell him the truth, Ms. Carter," the detective advised gently. "It's going to be tough, but he deserves to know everything. We can support you through this conversation." Nodding, Eloise felt a surge of resolve. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was determined to face them, ensuring a safe and loving environment for her son, no matter the obstacles. As they left the interview room, Eloise's thoughts returned to her son, awaiting her return, and to Corey, who was flying back to stand by their side. Together, they would rebuild and heal, their bond strengthened by the trials they faced.